she's an executive advisor and leadership coach. So she's worked with countless CEOs, CFOs, and provided them with to lead them through uncertain times and how to scale businesses. So has a whole host of experience of being an advisor through her advisory business, Ethos8, to our clients. So we thought it'd be a great opportunity just to have a session, which we want to be really interactive, where you can ask questions, share your own insights so that everyone's kind of getting involved. I guess, if you want to kind of pop questions in the chat, I'm happy to then introduce them. Or, we're a small enough team, if it's appropriate, just kind of just jump in, because if that's okay with you, Petra, it's not like we've got hundreds of people. I think because we're a small team, it'd be great for people just interject and interact. The session is being recorded because more often than not, people want to join and then something comes up last minute and they're not able to. So we do provide the recording after the fact. So just to have that in mind, don't share any sort of sensitive information that might be, you don't want it for public consumption. So with that, I guess if you can have your cameras on, that would be great. As I say, it's nice to see faces. Appreciate you might not be in a location where it's appropriate, but if you can, that would be great. And with that, I'll just pass across to you, Petra, and I'll stop talking.
Thank you very much for the intro. Just quick, so we migrated to Ethos8x because we really went through a whole like an innovation transformative process as well. So if you look me up, the company is Ethos8x. Anyhow, just to demonstrate also change, because everything I share, I advise on, I preach basically. I'm also trying to really emulate and embody myself in my own work with my team. So thank you for creating the opportunity, Christine, for me for being here. And thank you for all of you of dedicating your very precious time, which is, in my opinion, the most precious commodity we have, to being here and to engaging with all of us in this Zoom room this morning, because that's really where learning happens. I just told Chris before, I have like 60 slides. I can talk for days on this topic. However, I would like for you to also guide me. I'll show you at the beginning what my ideal agenda would be, but we will most likely not get through all of it. So please, again, pause or indicate what you would like more information on, or also more discussion on, because that's where learning really happens. It's I can convey information, but when you engage with a topic and when you then also go back into your organizations and apply what we talked about, that's really where the transformative learning happens. Okay, well, thank you very much. A little bit on my background. So I lived all over the world. I worked with teams all over the world. I've also worked with teams of all different sizes, from startup to mid-size to family-owned to public. In the end of the day, I'm dealing with humans, and they have similar characteristics, just different levels of responsibility, scale, and pressure consequently. I love this topic. I truly believe that you are charged with obviously the financial management of around the company, but the return on investments that all of your investors or owners expect really happens, in my opinion, by investing heavily in building the right human structure inside of the organization that will differentiate you in times of crisis, that will keep you more competitive, and that will just also make you an organization that people want to work for. And given the talent war and the talent, the challenges that we have in general, engaging people and retaining people and also making people work with each other, super important topic. Okay, I'll start sharing my screen again. Guide me as you. Okay, here we go. So topic today is leading through uncertainty, which of course these days we have plenty of. Can everybody see the screen? All good? Okay. If not, you can also give me thumbs up, or use your emojis in the call, whatever you want to use, voice, visuals, whatever, just stay interactive in the conversation, please. It makes it a lot more fun, makes it a lot more impactful too. So now, why is this not okay? Let me see. Okay, I'm having to click this one by one. Okay, I mean, you got this a little bit in the description as well, but I wanted to pick this up again. And by the way, when I look over, I have like 3 screens here, so that's why I hope it's not too distracting. the role of the CFO has always been an important role, but of course it's become more difficult, but more critical and more important. And in my opinion, I work a lot with CEOs. I work a lot with the C-suite, but my primary client is the CEO, and a strong strategic CFO who also understands the human dynamics is just invaluable to any CEO. And I'm also making boards, if they're not aware yet, but of the importance of really hiring or cultivating CFOs who think beyond the balance sheet. Because as you can see here, CEOs really are the anchors in organizations around clarity, resilience, and agility. And you can provide context to numbers. You can provide the why, to why are these numbers even important to the organization, to your board, the investors, in ways nobody else usually can. So critical role. And I really believe that the role is also, as I said here, the catalyst for smarter strategy and stronger culture. And sometimes it also gets underestimated, but you play a really super critical role in the organization, which is why this is such an important topic. A little bit, you know what, I'm going to skip this. You can read this up on LinkedIn, who I am, in the interest of time. This is the agenda I was thinking about, and I just wanted to, again, put in the chat so that Chris can see this, what you want maybe more or less time on. And I'll go through these topics around resilience. What does it even mean? What does it mean to build high-performing teams? How do you become a secure base as a leader? The importance of cultivating commitment and accountability that has become more difficult in the organizations I see because workforce has become more transient. People are less inclined to stay in a role for a long time, so more and more difficult to cultivate, but also remaining on the forefront of innovation, also being able to adapt to the forever changing political, economic, global landscape we're dealing with. I'd like to talk a little bit about the pyramid versus the tree leadership model and what that means. This is inspired by the Netflix culture, actually. And then I'm a huge believer in leading from the future. And what I mean with that is really looking ahead and then reverse engineering what that means for us in the now, what that means for us a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And by the way, interrupt me also if there are questions. If any terminology I use does not make sense to you or you would like to go deeper on. But this is what I was thinking. Now, you know what? Actually, let me go back. I'd like to hear from you. What does resilience mean to you? What do you understand by resilience for yourself and for your role? And you can speak up, which would actually be preferable to chat if anybody has a comment they would like to make. If not, I will just ask you. So Paul, Paul B, I'm going to call it Paul B and Paul K because we already, Paul K already, weighed in. What do you relate to when you think about resilience and developing a resilient culture and company? Paul, you're on mute.
Thanks, Petra. By the way, I appreciated your comment about leading from the future because people will often hear me say that I'm always thinking about what the end is in mind and then backing into how you need to execute from here to there.
Yep.
And it takes a lot to keep telegraphing back and forth. So thanks for those comments. Um, I think I think resilience for me and is while navigating uncertainty and maintaining financial stability and driving strategic growth. We got to think through economic volatility, geopolitical shifts, technological disruptions, really while ensuring like our company remains agile and competitive. And there's a lot of sort of buckets that goes into in terms of leadership and technology integrations, data-driven decision making, things like that. So I think through those things really on a daily basis, plus a lot of other things as you can appreciate. So
I think you have one of the toughest jobs in the organization. I really do, because also you are really the steward, right? Also of
that's
the
right.
capital of the company, and
Yes,
people
of course.
don't always want to be often want or but don't want to be told or don't want to be reminded of the limitations, right? So managing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you're talking to somebody that spent his entire career in venture and private equity backed environments. So, cash is always king.
Yes.
It always becomes a friction point sometimes, but I think, how you communicate, with the team about capital allocations and how we're spending and keeping people involved with transparent communications is really key, especially, if you're working through volatile times or like the gentleman mentioned earlier on, that started off with like the M&A integration and the talent pool and your comments about doing that up front, all of those things sort of apply. So
Yep. Thank you for that contribution. I loved your summary of how what you associate with resilience, but also, I mean, some of my clients are private equity companies and VC companies, and I'm really inspired actually. VC companies have been more progressive the last few years. I think, penetrating the mindset of private equity here as well. So I've just signed a couple of private equity clients because traditionally, so much about the numbers, right? Any investment in people is often secondary, not primary. And
yeah,
so in my conversations, I go to a lot of M&A events, so I have a lot of exposure to those companies, and
yeah,
they're finally opening up because the challenges they see with their CEOs and their
yeah,
CEOs managing teams have become so much stronger and have so much more of an impact on the bottom line that they're kind of
yeah.
realizing investment here is necessary. It's encouraging
Yeah.
to see. Still a long way to go, but
No, I agree with that 100%, Petra, because again, I'm one of those people that are like a broken record sometimes, but it's always people and culture, then everything else cascades down from there. And if you can get those two right, or at least more close to right, I think you've got a better shot in terms of execution and stuff. So,
absolutely. If you want good arguments, I think most people on this globe know who Netflix is. And so like Reed Hastings, and also there's a lady called Erin Meyer wrote a beautiful book, and the pyramid versus tree leadership model comes from that. It's called No Rules Rules. I highly recommend it. It's like one of the I think most impactful leadership books written, and it gives you practical examples. And Netflix is an example of how the investment in culture really multiplied, obviously, their bottom line. They skyrocketed in ultimately their revenue generation, and they attribute that a lot to their changes and how they led the company. So,
So,
um,
Petra, there's some great points actually in the chat. So I don't know whether there's a couple of people have made some really good points. Silvanio, I don't know whether you wanted to raise what you talked about talking about adaptability.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about this analogy of, being able to resist at some point so to some challenge and just learn from this constant pressure that I guess we from finance um, receive every single day in terms of delivering margins, profitability, all those things, cost reductions, and somehow learn from those things and come out better from that. That was an idea that was just crossing my mind.
yes. No.
Yeah, there's a few people said the same thing actually. Common theme there.
Well, it's
Yeah.
also, I mean, this is also when you communicate with your people, right? And Paul said that earlier. Ultimately, I think a big role that the CFO has is to provide context and understanding to the numbers, right? So that people understand, why do these numbers matter? Because people that are not driven or that maybe lack the understanding of the financial implications and the financial correlations, and therefore also don't have the excitement or the again the connection to the topic, right? And so crafting context, creating narratives people can relate to, let's say, whether that's in times of crisis or whether that's in times of successes, that they can then derive from that. What does that mean for my role, right? How do I show up as a better contributor to ultimately achieving these numbers that we want to achieve? How does it relate to me, and why does it matter? This is something I really want to talk about as well. And again, especially in crisis, that conversation becomes even more important but it should be an ongoing conversation topic. The more educated people are, the more why and context they have, the more engaged they will become. So I will rush through some of these a little bit in the interest of time. Again, I think it's clear to all of us that volatility is not a phase anymore. Given what's happening in the world, we kind of have to just get used to dealing with volatility across the board. Again, the CFO today has to be or become the anchor of clarity, calm, and conviction. That's what I meant a little bit with a secure base as well. People need for their leader to become a secure base. People's minds are a big passion of mine. It's really understanding neuroscience and how the brain works. And I can tell you, and I'll get to that in a slide as well, fear and anxiety are the biggest detractors from productivity, engagement, and really high performance. And what you can do as a leader to your people is provide security. That doesn't mean that things are always smooth and things are always easy. Security means that your people feel, number one, that you are in control. And even if you don't have all the answers, that you'll find them, right? That you exude this inner confidence, this inner calm, but also that they are safe with you when they are authentic, when they are honest, when they're transparent. They won't get their wrists slapped. We will have a conversation like, yes, this didn't go the way we would like it to go, but ultimately, let's look at what went wrong here. That you do post-mortems. Sometimes you do pre-mortems, right? You analyze what happened here and use these crisis moments as learning moments. That is really important in building high-performing cultures, that people are not afraid when things go wrong, that they adapt quickly and figure out how they can fix the situation. We'll go into this in more detail. Again, commitment and accountability need to be cultivated. This is not just true for younger generations, but it is harder to keep them committed and engaged because they tend to not have big mortgages. They don't even buy cars, at least where I live. Young people just want a lot of flexibility. They want to change companies really fast. They don't have the long history with companies that people my generation usually have or had. And then adaptive and innovative thinking, more important than ever, because again, the environments around us are changing so fast. Also, internal environments are sometimes changing very fast. Think M&A. And so for people to really be able to adapt and innovate quickly and adjust to new circumstances is really critical. And of course, if you invest in all of these things, it will be easier to retain, but also to attract talent. And again, leading from the future is a necessity. And then really looking ahead. I just had one of my clients is a CEO of a large bank. And so we just spent half a day at Salesforce. And I said to the Salesforce guys, I don't want for this to be a sales conversation. He's coming to Silicon Valley to broaden his horizons. He really just wants to learn and to think about the future. What are the trends? What does he have to think about to remain a competitive bank? They did a brilliant job. They literally bespoke for, it was almost 6 hours, on the future of what does Salesforce see, right? How do they look at these current and future trends for their own strategy? This is a conversation that should always happen internally, but you should also make sure that your key strategic decision makers go out and explore and engage with other industries and stay really ahead of what we might need, what should be part of our strategy. Any questions? I want to get all the information across. So sharpening your financial and leadership mindset has become an imperative. You obviously all are financially sharp, but really the fact that you're here speaks volumes of you care about the right things, and that is learning more about building resilient and high-performing teams. Now, when I think about high performance, I like Formula One, this is why I put this in there. But what does that mean to your people? What does that mean to your organization? A lot of people look too much at productivity just through the numbers. You have to look at sustainable productivity. How do you keep your people engaged, but also how do you keep them mentally and emotionally balanced? And that has a lot to do with leadership and the culture you create. Okay, the key characteristics of great leaders to me are that they are aware and they're willing to invest in designing high performance environments because it takes effort, it takes time, it takes resources. Again, we talked about the concept of becoming a secure base. Then what I'm really big on is whenever I take on a new assignment, and it can be for different reasons. It could be developing a CEO, working with a board, working with an executive team, solving a conflict, onboarding somebody, dealing with M&A integration, you name it. For all of those engagements, I require that people take an assessment with me that really helps me understand really how they tick, how they are motivated, what they're triggered by, how we can manage their triggers. I have a particular assessment that gives me a lot of data points around it, but the goal is to deepen self-awareness and awareness of others. Because to become or be a great leader, you have to be self-aware. And you have to be able to read a room. You have to be able to understand what's going on in another person's mind and how is your communication landing with them. Because I'm sure you've all experienced you're in a meeting, everybody gets the same message, and yet everybody hears something slightly different and sometimes not so slight. That happens because people have different motivational lenses and motivational needs. And I'll elaborate on that in another slide.
Can I just say something there, Petra? So obviously we work with a whole host of clients to appoint new CFOs, and actually it's more common than I thought it would be, where I'll say, why are you looking to engage a new CFO? And quite often it's like, well, current persons just lack self-awareness, or the perception of what they're doing is very different to how it's being perceived by other people. So I think that's a really, really important one.
And by the way, it's very interesting, and you'll see, I'll show you briefly the basic of the assessment. So there are different motivational needs, and based on your motivational needs, there are good matches in what you should pick in your career, right? CFOs usually have high one scores, which means they're strict perfectionists. That means that things need to be neat and in order, which you want for a CFO. They're usually also high on a scale about where they look at the system, but they look at the risk. They look at what do we have to mitigate against. You also want that. So that's a 1 and a 6 score. Sometimes they often also have a high 8 score that's trying to be in control. Active controller is the terminology for that. Those are all motivational drivers you want in a CFO. However, that I know when I see a score like that, that person just needs to have a little bit more development on other scores, right? And so there's the whole idea around the assessment I do is you look at what do we need to do to balance this person out, to make them a holistic leader. And other people who may have more of, let's just say, the EQ drivers in spade, they lack other things. So either the solution is then you team up with somebody, it could be a chief of staff for somebody who kind of cultivates or reminds them of things, or you cultivate that ideally in the person themselves. But really, really great insight, Chris, because again, we all need to balance out. We have certain tendencies that we naturally go to, our go-tos, and then there are others that we have to cultivate and develop. And the problem is that the intentions may always be good, but when we are not aware of others, we cannot connect the dots easily in how our messaging lands with them. And the key here is really to curate your messaging so that the people it is designed for, targeted towards, can really hear what you're trying to say. That's why this is so important. But it can totally be coached, by the way. Unless somebody is completely stubborn, once they look at their data points that I walk them through, these light bulbs go on, and they finally understand why this is such a challenge sometimes. Of course, what helps here as well is to remain curious, right? And to listen very actively, because people will give you clues and cues, especially when they feel safe around you. Safety and security, just from a neuroscience perspective, when the brain feels safe and secure, it is a lot more creative, it is a lot more engaged, and it will find solutions to problems much better and much faster. Which is why you need to understand people's motivational needs, and you need to create a culture of trust and safety. Hugely important in building high-performing teams. If you have any questions, either put them in the chat or raise your hand. I can't see everybody's hand, but I think, Chris, you can. So
Actually, I can't know, but yeah, if anyone wants to add anything in the chat, I can introduce you or just speak. It's fine.
Yeah. And then again, of course, you have to lead with authenticity and transparency. You can't just say, okay, we have a culture where these values reside. Companies often have values, but first of all, most people either don't know them to begin with, or they don't really understand what that now means in how they should behave. And or even if they understand all of that, maybe our culture really doesn't live up to its values. And so it's really embrace, if you have values, use them intentionally so that your people believe you're real. Authenticity goes a long way in leadership. Um, Also, clarity. What I see a lot is that people are just not clear in their communication just because it's clear in our head, especially you are the experts here on finance, right? It doesn't mean it's clear for other people. They don't connect the dots the same way. So you have to figure out what is relevant for them and how do you give them context to the numbers you are referring to or operating on. Building connected teams, that means really trying to break up silos as much as possible. That again is related to safety and security. People share information a lot earlier and a lot more transparently when they feel there's connection, there's safety. Provide context, not control. Contextual leadership is a lot more effective than controlling. Now, control is not always negative. In this context, I'm referring to the negative part of control because I said earlier, a lot of CFOs have high 8 scores. That means they're driven by staying in control. That's a positive. Control can be very positive because it provides safety and security, but the communication around it matters. When people understand why control is necessary and why sometimes you have to make a hierarchical decision, they'll go for it. It's a lot easier for people to disagree and commit when they understand why the decision is being made. And again, leading from the future, you'll see that pretty much in every context with me, because when you know where you're trying to go to, where you're headed, it's much easier to reverse engineer.
Petra, I just noticed that Alex had mentioned a couple of things in the chat on a few points. Alex, did you want to just bring those up?
Yes, thank you. It's an interesting environment we live today. So we can see from different perspective, like from external environment, it's a challenge by all means. A lot of uncertainties out there. I think the biggest challenge we CFOs face is from internal environment. And look from the team to build up a great team, a strong team. Is supporting transparency and also make them accountable for. Okay, the other day I had a client and Alex, can we share the numbers with them? It's by all means, go ahead and share the numbers. You don't have to share, the bottom line, but you have the sales, but the gross profit by line of business and so on. Make them accountable, make them part of the team. To make them, there's a great commitment for them to say, yes, let's grow, let's build up the numbers, let's deliver the value, let's grow the business. I think that's, it's both ways. In a sense, you support the team with transparency in the communication, and at the same time make them accountable because at the end of the day, you got to deliver some value there.
Absolutely. I mean, accountability is huge and it can be achieved faster and better, again, when all these other things are in place. But I agree. People need accountability because it also is closely related to purpose. And people do better when they feel that they have a purpose. When they don't feel accountable, they're not engaged. It's as simple as it is, but it's harder these days to create accountability because I mean, I've raised 3, children who are now adults themselves. So I've gone through the process. And I'm German, right? So I'm operating on the West Coast in the US, at least that's where my kids were raised. And so I've seen that I feel like gratification happens a lot faster. People don't have to work as hard anymore. At least when I watched them going to school, the reward system was sometimes very easy. So it's hard then to create accountability when things are just given to people freely all the time. That's just my experience with that. And again, I mean, there's a happy middle ground, but I think developing a culture of accountability is key. And you'll see that I have a slide in there that's based on the Patrick Lencioni model. He calls it the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I'm after the 6 hyper functions of a team, but his methodology is core to that. And we'll get to that in a minute. But thank you for that, Alex. Here's the method I was referring to. So I'm using what's called the Enneagram. I have a particular provider out of South Africa because they're exceptionally advanced in their data analytics. But I'll keep it just basic. people, there are 9 different perspectives which people look at the world. And we score across all 9. But based on who we are, number one, different ones are more dominant than others, but also the correlations are different, which is why humans are complex. Humans are very diverse and different, right? So I couldn't just put humans in 9 buckets, but it's really how these scores intercorrelate. They give me as a trained coach a super, I mean, I get the client gets a report, but I get a data report. And I can literally walk in and tell a CEO, okay, here's the problems we'll be facing. Here's how this person will or will not fit in the team, or here's what we need to work on with that person to accelerate their onboarding. I just had a case. This was actually the first where I was preparing for an offsite with a team, and I did an analysis on somebody they had just hired. And the data points really did not make sense to me. So I said to the CEO, hey, I don't want to jump to conclusions too fast. I want to see how he shows up in the offsite. Observed him for a day while I was doing the offsite, and just really didn't sit right with me. So I had a debrief with the CEO the next day, and I said, listen, there are things that are really off in who he claims to be. I think he faked the assessment, which is really not possible because I'll see it, but people obviously try. I said, but his behavior is completely not in alignment on how he pretends to be motivated here. And so we interviewed a couple of other people who also expressed concern. And I give the CEO credit, although he himself was a quiet specialist, which means a deep thinker who doesn't necessarily make decisions fast. He literally within 48 hours is like, okay, that person was a bad hire. He needs to go. They let him go and now hired a perfect person. It fits the team well, fits the role well. But he's like, from here on out, we're doing an Enneagram on everybody before we hire them so that we don't make costly hiring mistakes. But it can be used in many ways, but it is very accurate. And if you know what you're after and if you know what a team needs, you can make much better hiring decisions and also much better leadership and career development decisions for a person when you have this information. I won't go too deep, but you can see I'll have a slide on that explains to you what different people are motivated by, and therefore you have to adjust your communication to it. But very powerful information. So, again, self-awareness is really key to great leadership. By the way, because I'll rush through some of these slides just in the interest of time, and I want to give a little bit of time, more time for interactive conversation. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put up a slide at the end with my email, but also Chris has it. So happy to provide you more information if I'm just going too fast here. This is what's important. The circle you just saw with the different types, right? These different types have completely different needs. The strict perfectionist is motivated by the desire to be right. Again, you want that in finance. That is a great finance score because you want for your numbers to be accurate. You want for somebody to be detail-oriented. Versus the considerate helper, that is more usually a score with people that have a more developed EQ because they're motivated by the desire to help and support. I see that a lot more in HR departments. I see that in chiefs of staffs, right? I mean, all of these things matter and all of them should be represented in a team, but certain roles do better when somebody has certain scores attached or associated with them. The competitive achiever, motivated by the desire to win. You have a lot of competitive achievers in sales teams. That's where they should be because that's how they're incented. That's how they should be operating. A lot of CEOs actually come from the competitive achiever or the active controller or the enthusiastic visionary front, and I'll explain why. But of course, competitive achievers do well because you give them a goal and they'll do everything to get there. You have intense creatives, not so much represented in top leadership positions usually, but they do well because they want to be different. They do well in creative jobs. They do well in areas where you want for somebody to want to be different. A little bit harder to lead usually. Quiet specialists. I see that a lot in engineering. I see that in science. A lot of PhDs, a lot of people who are very cerebral in their work have high quiet specialist scores. Sometimes CEOs who've been engineers come up like that, but they usually reach their limits at some point with leadership because they like to be kind of in a lab or in just behind a screen and just do their thing and become just experts in their field. Loyal skeptics, I see that in a lot in finance. They should also do well in quality assurance. They do well in legal. That's where I want them. They do well in cybersecurity. When I know that about somebody, I know they're a great fit for those roles. The enthusiastic visionary, motivated by the desire to be free. They like to disrupt things. I see that a lot more in startups. CEOs that build disruptive startups often have a high 7 score. That's what drives them. They usually don't do well, right? When I'm integrating somebody with a high 7 score, I know for sure that they will stay as long as they have to in the new larger organization, but they will either eventually opt out and do the next startup, or I have to move them into a role where they become the chief evangelist. Or they travel the world and build partnerships, right? They need a job where it's about new creation of things. Active controllers do well. CEOs that have high active controller scores, or CFOs, do well in larger organizations because they like scale, they like systems, they like process. And then adaptive peacemaker, again, I don't see that too much in top leadership levels because it's hard for them. They want harmony, they want peace, they want for everybody to be happy. Almost mutually exclusive to being a strong leader because you have to make tough decisions. All of these types could do anything. The point is, what do they thrive on doing? Where will they excel? Where will they kick into high performance? Any questions? I know I'm offloading a lot on you. I think it's just important to be aware that different people see the world or see the same message through different lenses, which means when you have one-on-ones or when you're trying to drive a deal or when you're integrating a new team, be mindful what drives them and what they will therefore be interested in, how you motivate them.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a brief question. Hi, I'm Ken. Just looking at the diagram, not necessarily if everyone doesn't fit in a particular group, do we want to just cut heads? Some of us don't have that option. We step into businesses that already have an established staff. You can't kill the staff right away, right? So I'm guessing there's ways that you can tweak it that it just, that you say, okay, it just moves from different category to category slightly in different ways that would optimize your group, right? I'm guessing that's the goal.
The goal is anyway that the highest performing teams have the highest diversity of these scores because they'll hold each other accountable. They keep each other in check because they look at the same problem in different ways. So it's not a bad thing for a team. It's actually a great thing for a team to have that diversity. As it relates to the individual, we are all a combination of those 9 motivational needs. The question is just usually when I do a team analysis, I create an overview so that the CEO basically has an analysis for all his or her people. And then we look at, okay, how did they score across these 9 dimensions? And usually the top 3 scores explain a lot how they operate, how they behave, how they show up. And then if they are a problem, which they don't necessarily have to be, but if they are, then we look at, okay, where do they have to be coached or developed?
Okay.
Or as I grow my team or change my team, is there a position where they might be just better suited to the needs of that position? It also helps when 2 people don't get along, right? Then we look at, okay, where are the friction points and how do I now help both of them? I do that a lot, actually. When we have 2 people fighting and we need for them to get along, I work with them on adjusting their communication to what the other person needs versus coming from what they would like to hear, because that's a human tendency, right? We tend to go to, well, if I say that, we tend to communicate in a way that we like to receive communication usually, or at least how we can hear somebody, but that may totally not be what the other person needs. So it's becoming aware of that and then adjusting your communication to their needed style that keeps them calm. Because coming back to neuroscience, when somebody feels safe and is not in a reactive mode, they think more clearly. I come to constructive outcomes much faster. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and this again comes back to trust. Trust is is a foundational layer for high performance between individuals and within teams. Huge fan of Simon Sinek. If you don't know him, he's an influencer, he's a writer, he's a speaker. He talks a lot about the importance of why. People need to understand your why and their own why too. Okay. Trust, core pillar for connected teams. And so this is what you don't want. You don't want to feel like this. You don't want for the people on your team to feel like this. This is the opposite for being in high performance mode. When you are like this, you're usually in fight, flight, or freeze mode because something has happened that triggered you, that makes you anxious, that makes you fearful, that makes you reactive. In that state, when you or somebody in your team is in that state, you need to do things to kind of keep them back in balance. You cannot achieve anything when they are like this because the brain will continue to just scan its environment for danger, not a productive state of mind. This is where you want people excited about their job, really like, like, yes, I'm in the right job. This is a tough problem. I can solve it. But that mindset is when the brain is in high performance. The person's in balance, the person is happy, the person is ready. It's like this race car ready to get on the track. And psychological safety increases engagement and accelerates speed to solutioning or solving problems. This is what happens when people are fearful, right? Our brain hasn't changed. I deliberately picked the saber-toothed tiger picture. Our brain has not changed. Just what causes fear has changed. That, caveman time, it was life-threatening incidents happened to people in their daily lives. Today, what feels life-threatening to the brain is the opinion of others. And that's why people, kind of protect information, don't share, react. They're protecting because they feel like somebody is mentally or emotionally after them. Be mindful of that. Okay, I'm going to skip my stories because we're running out of time because I want to give you some real life stories from my clients, but it takes too long. Important nugget here to remember, build your trust before the crisis happens because when you have it, people will follow you and will be proactive in solving for problems in crisis when there's trust in the team or in the trust between the leader and the individual. Connection really, really matters. Developing inner confidence. I used the picture of a little child because when you look at little kids, they're just very present. They don't run all these filters based on past experiences or things where they've been told off. They just go for it. That's what you want to instill in your people. You want for them to have inner confidence, which can only happen when they feel safe. Little kids usually, if with good parents, they have a very safe environment, which is why they have inner confidence and they'll just go for things. That's what you kind of want to instill as an emotion in your people. And then back to this topic of cultivating commitment and accountability. Yes, very important. This is against Simon Sinek. Explain to people why you're doing something. Then you will, whether that's a client. By the way, I look at employees or team members as internal clients. I always tell my CEOs, you have external and internal clients, but you need to think about how you treat them the same way. Context matters a lot. As a CFO, one of your top priorities, building context around the numbers you share so that people can follow you. Perspective matters. Particularly for people, again, you have that a lot in CFO ranks, but you also have it a lot in investor ranks and CEO ranks. Is the 8 score. Perspective always matters. But people with high 8 scores like their data and they want to know when things are off. Most CFOs do. And so also cultivating in your people, don't be afraid when the numbers are bad, but please bring them to me early so that I can course correct and we don't crash the plane. That's why I'm using the cockpit. Feedback and alignment. That's the other thing I see a lot. People don't give regular feedback. Even if you give it, like most companies have if at best quarterly, some have semi-annually, some have annually. You should give feedback as close to the incident as possible. Regular feedback makes it less awkward, creates a discipline around feedback and makes sure we are aligned. Because I sometimes just see people are being laid off and they were or they feel blindsided. Because I had no idea I was so off. Or even it doesn't even have to be laying somebody off. It could be just really veering off the project's off track. Why is that? Because we're not regularly giving feedback when things are not handled properly. So healthy micro habits for any leader. Talk about trade-offs, right? You may not like the fact that I'm not giving you budget for this or that I'm cutting budget for this, but here's a trade-off. Hard messages or difficult messages are much easier to relay when when the person understands what the trade-off is. Again, that's a why action or micro habit. Stay calm under pressure, which is my clients often leverage me as I'm the safe place, and that's where they can share really what they may be afraid of or concerned about or upset about. As a leader, stay calm. Go to your coach, go to if you have a CFO, a CEO peer group, go there. I'm a huge believer in both of it, obviously, which is why I do it. But have your safe place where you can go because you need it too. And set a clarity cadence. I'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, we only have like 7 minutes at this point. I
Yeah.
can keep going and going. Maybe the one thing, there's a lot here. What I would love to talk a little bit about is the leadership model. Okay, briefly this. This is so Patrick Lencioni has developed a framework that's called the 5 dysfunctions of a team. This is important because I always try to convey to my clients positive language really matters. And whilst the framework is absolutely brilliant, I'm not a big believer in talking about what's wrong with a team. Because if you talk about dysfunction, then people start looking for where's the dysfunction in our team. Yes, usually teams have dysfunctions, families have dysfunctions. But what I want for a leader to think about is where do I want to get this team? Again, leading from the future. If this team was perfectly functioning, what would the attributes of this team be? And I've also added, so this is not a Lencioni part, the self-aware team members. When team members become self-aware, they become a lot more constructive in collaboration. That builds high trust, that allows healthy conflict, that drives commitment, that drives accountability, that drives results. Again, that's a whole session by itself, but I just wanted to put it in there so that you see it. Maybe ask yourself the question, we won't have time to discuss it, but how prepared is your team, right? Are they prepared for a crisis or for the next crisis? What's your framework for dealing with crisis? And what can you do to make them feel safe? But this again also, what is the triple role of the modern CFO? You're a risk guardian, a strategic guide, and a culture shaper. All of these, that's a lot, but you have the power to be very influential in all of 3 of these areas. Yeah, they're practical things, but okay.
So I'm just thinking, yeah, we are really, really tight on time, and this has all just been amazing. And as you're talking about it, Petra, it's not just a CFO as a leader of a team, but it's also being aware of some of this stuff, how they interact if they're going through an M&A process. Getting into the mindset of the people that they're, all of the stakeholders that are involved in that process, dealing with all of these banks. It's huge. So.
And by the way,
really
and sorry to
important.
interrupt, but also bear in mind, right? These motivational needs, they also exist in your board. So when
Right.
I work with CEOs on CFOs on board management, becoming aware of who are these characters that sit around my boardroom table and what drives them, very
Right.
important.
I
Just
guess we'll open it up to the room and just see if anyone's got any questions, just because we're literally I'm conscious of everybody's time. We've got like 6 minutes.
just quickly, put a slide up, we can talk, but I just want to say this is a traditional model. This is so literally where you have to go through decision making and it can take a long time. This is a Netflix model. And just I put it in a tree to make it a little bit easier as a next picture, and then we can talk. Sorry to interrupt you, Chris, but I think this
That's
is
fine.
really important to think about, right? And this is what that looks like. You are at the root. Imagine like you are the foundation of the tree. Like in the storm, you are making sure the tree doesn't topple. You are what provides nutrients to the tree. You're the base, your secure baseline for this team. That's how you build empowered teams. And then now I'll be quiet. Sorry, Chris. And leave it up for discussion. But I thought this was a good one to reflect on before you leave the room.
It's brilliant. I guess just want to open it up if anyone's got any pressing comments or any insight they want to share before we we close, I'm sure we could spend hours talking. Well, you and I could, Petra, we could spend hours talking about this. But yeah,
I love this. It makes a huge big difference for you as a leader, for your team, and for the organization. Absolutely.
absolutely. So yeah, anyone want to jump in? Feel free if you've got specific questions.
If you don't, I'll just skip forward to questions you should be asking your team. Okay, this is really the tree description, but let me just go. I think I put one. Yep. I may want to leave you with this just to reflect on. Because those are things you'll all be confronted with in your CFO roles. Any reaction to those questions? Do they resonate with you? Might that be applicable for your team dynamics? Do you think this would be helpful? Can't see everybody. I know that I'm just looking for who hasn't said anything just yet. Carl.
Yeah, I think that second one rings the truest for me. It speaks to being proactive versus reactive, and that's an easy bad habit to fall into, is just reacting to things that happened versus planning for things that might happen.
You're absolutely right. And by the way, again, from a neuroscience perspective, the brain will deal with the crisis much better when it's already thought a potential crisis through. That's why we do earthquake readiness training in California, right? Or I'm sure in other places you have tornado readiness or tsunami readiness, because you prep. And when you prep, number one, you identify gaps, but also then you reduce the fear factor when the actual event happens. And you can really be a lot more creative in finding solutions to the problems that occur.
Yeah. Alex, you raised your hand.
Yes, depending on the complexity you face and depending how long you've been with the organization as a CFO, I think the weekly meetings, sometimes even the weekly meetings to support the team, to understand the team, to understand the complex, to communicate and support, overall, that's kind of the frequency of the meeting is important to be with the team.
Yes, absolutely. From a clarity, that's why I said the clarity cadence, right? Have very regular meetings to calibrate clarity, which also then can become feedback. They can have feedback loops in them. But make that a habit. Basically, you're forcing people to think, because it's to think and to express it, because in putting it in words is where the precision and the clarity need to happen. We can have all these things spinning around in our heads. That's easy well, maybe not always easy, but that can just be running and we think we've got it. When we have to start writing something down and preparing for a meeting, getting concise, that's really when we have to engage with the problem. Bridget, any thoughts from you? Anything that comes up for you?
This all resonates with me. I really like the questions to ask my team, and the tree, definitely something to share with my team, because that's where we need to be if we're not there now.
Yep. Thank you. And by the way, as you were talking, I just realized I didn't even comment on it. As I was designing this presentation, I deliberately picked these little visuals. They're connecting the dots, right? As a CFO, you have a lot of insights to connect the dots on the finance and the culture and the bigger picture level, right? That is a huge responsibility, but it also gives you a lot of power to really contribute to building great companies.
Yeah, I mean, I have that conversation a lot as well with CFOs, but also with CEOs when we're talking about bringing in a new CFO. It's for me, and I may be biased, but I think it's the most crucial role within an organization, from every angle that you've just mentioned. So yeah, big shout out to all you CFOs.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I promised I forgot this. I would put my contact details up. If you have any questions with whether it's Chris or me, please feel free to reach out. I love this. And there's a deliberate, the X in my email, there is no X because I don't want to get even more emails than I already have. And you know, when you open up a new website, you get just inundated. So whilst the company name is Ethos8x, my email is still ethos8.com.
So Petra, if you want to share those contact details with me, we'll send a wrap-up email after the session. And I'll share your details on there. So if anyone wants to reach out directly to have a follow-up conversation. The only other thing I wanted to mention is, I don't know whether all of you are members of, we've got a CFO network. It's hosted on Eugenie. Eugenie is an app. It's a bit like a WhatsApp group. It's very quiet at the moment. We've got one in the UK that's a lot more established, and people, CFOs, ask questions, share insight, ask for recommendations, and it's a really great resource. You know, if you're encountering a situation you've not faced before, to benefit from the experience of your peers. So we'll put details on the email about that as well. But I think, you know, conscious of time, we could speak a lot more on this, and I think it's been a really fascinating presentation, Petra. So really appreciate you taking the time out to prepare, to deliver, and thank you to everyone who's attended as well. And I think with that, it's probably time to bring the session to a close. Thank you.